I wasn't trying to become smarter. Not really. I just wanted to stop feeling dumb. There's a difference. Wanting to be smart is aspirational, but feeling dumb, that's a kind of quiet pain that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves you second-guessing everything. Your opinions, your worth, even your right to speak in a room. That's where I was. I didn't grow up thinking I was stupid, but somewhere along the way, people's reactions started writing a different story. Teachers who didn't call on me, classmates who smirked when I got an answer wrong, the manager who praised others for thinking strategically and called me hardworking like that was all I had to offer. And when you hear it enough, when you see the subtle shifts in someone's eyes after you speak, like they're recalibrating their expectations of you, you start to internalize it, you shrink, you edit yourself, you become really good at nodding and pretending you already knew that. But deep down, you feel like you're faking it, like you're a few steps behind trying to keep up with a game whose rules no one ever taught you. I think that's why I was vulnerable to what came next. It didn't come wrapped in hype or hashtags. It wasn't some flashy productivity course or brainwave boosting app. It came through a stranger's voice in a late-night forum, buried in a thread that had only 3 replies. The post title was simple: "Want to think 50% faster? Try this. But be careful, it changes more than just your brain." Normally, I'd scroll past stuff like that, but something about the way it was written, it didn't feel like someone selling something. It felt like a warning, like someone trying to get something off their chest. The user had deleted their account, but the post remained. It described something called cognitive stacking. Not in the nootropic sense, not pills or supplements. This was different. It was a kind of mental conditioning paired with behavioral loops, a way of layering thought patterns so your brain learns to see connections before you consciously register them. The idea was simple: train your brain to stack questions before answers. Most people do the opposite. They wait for certainty before acting. But if you stack questions, you force your mind to chase pattern recognition, to stay uncomfortable, to stop anchoring itself too early. There were steps too, all behavioral, no tech, no gimmicks. Things like journal only in questions for a week, reverse every opinion you have and argue the opposite out loud. Practice delay looping. Don't respond to anything instantly. Let it echo internally first. It sounded ridiculous, but I tried it. Not because I believed it would make me smarter. I just wanted to feel something other than fog and self-doubt. And here's the part I still can't explain. It worked, not like a lightning bolt, not overnight. But within days, I started noticing something. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was observing while I was reacting. It's hard to explain. It's like having a second self watching your first self in real time. Not judging, not narrating, just tracking. And the more I practiced the exercises, the stronger that second presence became. Soon, I noticed myself catching patterns before people even finished their sentences. I could anticipate where conversations were heading, not because I was psychic, but because I was processing wider. It's like my brain stopped looking at life through a straw and started seeing the entire table. But with that clarity came something else, a sharpness, a precision in how I thought, how I spoke, how I made decisions. And people noticed. At first, it felt amazing, like I'd finally been given permission to show up fully. My ideas got traction. I became someone people listened to, but there was a cost. Because along with the clarity came a kind of detachment, a widening gap between me and the people I used to resonate with. Conversations started to feel slow, predictable, like I already knew what someone would say before they said it, and I had to pretend to be surprised. Worse than that, I started losing patience. Not outwardly, I still smiled, still nodded, but inside I was screaming. I'd hear someone speak and think, "You don't even realize how wrong you are," or you're not saying what you mean, you're saying what sounds smart. And that voice, that superiority, it started to scare me because I remembered being on the other side of it. I wasn't becoming smarter, I was becoming dangerous. Because when you outpace people mentally and you lose empathy, you start using your intellect like a weapon. Not overtly, but subtly, through micro-corrections, through shifting conversations to places where only you feel at home, through making people feel small without ever raising your voice. That's when I knew I had to stop, or at least slow down. But by then, it wasn't just a habit, it was a system. My brain had rewired itself, and every time I tried to switch it off, to be more present, more patient, it felt like I was dragging myself through mud, until something happened that shook me to my core. A friend, one of my oldest, called me after a rough breakup. She was spiraling, not for advice, just to be heard. And without even realizing it, I started diagnosing her. Not in a cold way, just analytically. I broke down her patterns, her trauma loops, her attachment style. I turned her pain into a map, and she went silent. Then she said, "I didn't call to be understood like a puzzle. I just needed you to feel this with me." That hit me like a punch, because in that moment, I realized I'd trained my brain to solve, but I'd forgotten how to sit in the storm. The very thing that made me feel powerful was also making me unreachable. So I did something radical. I stopped practicing. I stopped journaling in questions. I stopped looping ideas. I stopped trying to be 50% smarter, and I started listening, really listening, to people, to silence, to myself. It was hard, slower, messier, but something strange happened. I started hearing tones in conversations I'd never noticed before. Not just the words, but the pain underneath them, the longing, the fear, the unsaid. I realized maybe I wasn't meant to outthink people. Maybe I was meant to connect with them, and the intellect was just a tool, not the point. There's a fine line between brilliance and isolation, and for a while, I walked too far past it. But now I'm learning to live in both worlds, to be sharp but soft, to lead with insight but still keep my humanity intact. Because the real brain hack isn't just about thinking faster, it's about feeling deeper. It's about balancing logic with presence, intellect with intimacy. And here's the truth: if you chase power without compassion, you end up alone at the top of a hill no one wants to climb. But if you can wield your intelligence in service of connection, if you can make people feel safer, not smaller, then you don't just become smarter, you become trusted. And that, I've learned, is a kind of genius all its own. There's something no one tells you about becoming sharper, about thinking faster, about learning to see things that others miss. It's this: clarity doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like loss. Because once your mind opens in that particular way, once it starts making connections others haven't even considered, it becomes harder and harder to unsee. You stop being surprised by people. You stop being comforted by lies you once needed. You begin to see the patterns, the manipulations, the defenses, the inconsistencies, not just in others, but in yourself. And when you see yourself that clearly, you can't hide behind old excuses anymore. That was the part that really shook me. It wasn't just that I saw people differently. It was that I saw me, not the version I liked to show, not the one I'd polished with time and habit, but the raw, unfinished, insecure version, the one who still feared being overlooked, the one who still equated being listened to with being loved. I thought being smarter would make me immune to that part of myself. But the truth, it only made it louder, more visible. I became aware of my need to win arguments, even in casual conversations. I noticed how often I reframed things to sound more insightful than they really were. I saw how I used insight as a shield. If I could just understand everything, maybe I wouldn't have to feel it. That's the dark side of this brain hack. It doesn't just increase your cognitive bandwidth, it exposes your emotional backlog. There was one night, I remember it vividly. I was alone in my apartment, late. The windows were open, the city humming just enough to keep me grounded, and I was scrolling through old texts. Not to reminisce, I was analyzing, looking at old conversations like data points. And then I found one, a message I'd sent to someone I used to love. Simple, 3 words, I'm still here. I remember typing it back then with shaking hands. Not because I was uncertain, but because I meant it fully, without defense, without strategy, just presence. Reading it again, I felt something crack because I hadn't spoken like that in a long time, hadn't allowed myself that kind of unfiltered vulnerability. Somewhere along the way, I had trained my mind to be efficient at the cost of being honest. That night, I closed my laptop. I turned off every screen, and I just sat there in the dark. No distractions, no inputs, just me and that old version of myself, simpler, softer, more afraid, but also more real. I didn't sleep much, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not pain, just truth. And truth, when it arrives, doesn't come gently. It cuts away what's no longer serving you. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling back, not from people, but from posturing, from needing to be the smartest person in the room, from correcting others when it didn't matter, from performing intelligence instead of just living it. I listened more, interrupted less, let silences hang longer. And in those silences, I noticed something I hadn't before. People became braver. When I stopped filling in the gaps, they filled them themselves. And what they offered wasn't always polished or brilliant, but it was real. And that's when I realized people don't need you to be smarter than them. They need you to be with them. There's this thing I've started saying to myself, smart enough to see the truth, wise enough to not weaponize it. Because the most dangerous kind of intelligence isn't the loud kind, it's the subtle kind. The kind that understands people so well it could manipulate them, but chooses not to. The kind that could win every argument but doesn't, because it values connection over victory. And that choice, that restraint, that's a different level of strength. One day someone asked me, "What's the smartest thing you've learned through all this?" I didn't hesitate. I said, to stop needing to be right. Not because truth doesn't matter, but because being right at the wrong time can do more damage than being wrong. It took me a long time to learn that, and I'm still learning. Because the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you stop growing. And the kind of mind I want, it's not just fast, it's curious, humble, open. It doesn't fear being wrong, it invites it. Because every correction is an opportunity to deepen understanding. And here's the real twist. The smarter I became, the more I returned to the basics, to presence, to empathy, to questions like, what matters right now? What does this person need? Am I building something here or just showing off? And when you start living from those questions, everything changes. You stop speaking to impress. You start speaking to connect. You stop analyzing people's behavior just to label it. You start understanding it to hold space for it. You stop using your brain to outrun your feelings. You start using your awareness to feel more responsibly. And slowly, almost without noticing, you become both sharper and softer. It's a strange combination. It confuses people. They don't know how to read you. Because you're not reacting the way they expect. You're not clinging to your ego. You're not making everything about you. You're just there, present, calm, clear. And in a world where everyone is trying so hard to be noticed, just being present is radical. So if you're still chasing that mental edge, still searching for the thing that will make you 50% smarter, Here's what I'll tell you. Yes, train your mind. Yes, sharpen your thinking. Yes, learn to see the patterns and the logic and the layers. But don't lose your humanity in the process. Don't become so mentally fast that you forget how to slow down. Don't become so good at thinking that you forget how to feel. Because real intelligence isn't just knowing more, it's knowing when to stop talking and start listening. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is nothing. Just be there with the person in front of you, with the moment you're in, with the truth that's quietly unfolding if you let it. Because the brain hack, the real one, it's not about speed, it's not about control, it's not even about results. It's about alignment. When your thoughts, your words, your actions, and your heart all point in the same direction, that's when you become not just smarter, but undeniable and dangerous in the best possible way. Not because you can dominate, but because you can elevate anyone, including the version of yourself you thought you left behind. And maybe, just maybe, that version's been waiting for you all along. There's a part of me I used to hide, the part that didn't just want to understand everything, but needed to, obsessively, compulsively, as if knowledge itself could be armor. If I could dissect every emotion, map every motive, anticipate every variable, then maybe, just maybe, I could avoid being hurt again. Maybe I could predict disappointment before it arrived, pre-grieve every loss, outthink every betrayal. It sounds exhausting because it was, but it worked at first. I became known for my insight. People trusted my judgment. They came to me for advice, for perspective, for clarity. They didn't know how many hours I spent spinning behind the scenes, replaying conversations, analyzing tone shifts, decoding silences. They didn't see the nights I stayed up crafting the perfect response to a text that didn't even deserve one. They just saw the result, someone who always seemed composed, calculated, untouchable. That's the trap no one talks about. When you get good at understanding people, they stop understanding you because you become a mirror too clean to touch. And in being that mirror, you forget how to be seen. I had one person, only one, who saw past it all. She didn't buy the performance. She saw the analysis for what it really was, a defense mechanism. She once told me, "You're not hard to understand. You're just hard to feel." At the time, I laughed, brushed it off, but I never forgot it because she was right. I had turned my mind into a fortress. Every insight, every mental shortcut, every refined instinct, it all became part of a carefully constructed defense. I thought that if I was 10 steps ahead, I wouldn't have to be present. I wouldn't have to risk softness. I wouldn't have to be vulnerable in a world that taught me vulnerability gets exploited. But over time, something began to shift. I started noticing that I wasn't feeling joy the way I used to. Not fully, not freely. Everything became a muted hum of satisfaction rather than a roar of aliveness. Achievements didn't land, compliments didn't stick, relationships didn't last, because when you stop letting things touch you, you also stop letting them move you. And what's the point of being smart, being perceptive, being in control if you feel numb the entire time? I didn't realize how deep it had gone until I tried to write something honest. Not clever, not profound, just honest. And I couldn't. Every sentence turned into a performance. Every paragraph bent itself toward insight. I couldn't even be real with myself anymore. That's when I knew I had to change. Not undo what I'd built, but rewire the purpose behind it. My brain wasn't the enemy. My mind wasn't the problem. It was the intention behind how I used it. So I started small. I began writing morning pages, 3 pages, stream of consciousness, no editing, no analyzing, just whatever came out. At first, it was awkward, stiff. My brain kept trying to make it useful, insightful. But slowly, I started hearing my real voice again, the one that didn't care about sounding smart, the one that just wanted to be heard. And then I did something even harder. I started sharing things I hadn't fully figured out yet. That was terrifying. Because for so long, I'd only spoken once I had answers. I only joined conversations when I felt armed with clarity. But this time, I let myself be uncertain. I let myself ask dumb questions. I let myself say, I don't know. And something incredible happened. People didn't pull away, they leaned in. Because when you stop trying to be impressive, you become relatable. And that's where the real connection lives. Not in your brilliance, but in your bravery. The bravery to say, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm here anyway. As I kept doing this, letting myself be raw, be present, be messy, something wild began to happen. My thinking didn't get slower. It got deeper, more nuanced, more textured, because it was no longer driven by the fear of inadequacy. It was rooted in curiosity, in compassion, in truth. You see, when you train your brain to outpace pain, you also bypass healing. You move around the wound instead of through it. But healing doesn't happen in acceleration. It happens in stillness, in allowing the discomfort to speak, in holding the grief, not fixing it, in sitting with confusion, not rushing to resolve it. There were days I wanted to go back, days I missed the certainty, the efficiency, the seductive power of being the sharpest mind in the room. But then I'd remember what it felt like to laugh without restraint, to cry in front of someone without shame, to say, I love you without needing it to be strategic or safe. And I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, because intelligence without heart is just noise, and I wanted more than noise. I wanted resonance. So I kept practicing presence. I learned to listen without planning my response. I learned to pause before offering advice. I learned that silence isn't emptiness, it's invitation. I also started paying attention to the people who didn't need me to perform, the ones who liked me for my questions, not just my answers, the ones who didn't flinch when I was quiet, who didn't shrink when I was vulnerable. Those people, few as they were, became anchors, proof that I didn't have to earn love with insight. I just had to show up as I am, flawed, in progress, alive. And gradually, the pressure to be 50% smarter faded, because I realized being smarter isn't the goal, being whole is. And wholeness means holding contradictions. It means being both intuitive and analytical, sensitive and strong, quiet and bold, curious and convicted. It means knowing when to think and when to feel. And it means accepting that some parts of you will always be in conflict. That's not a failure, that's humanity. That's what this entire journey has taught me, that the real brain hack isn't about optimizing or outperforming. It's about remembering who you were before you needed to prove yourself, before you turned your intelligence into armor, before you believed that worth had to be earned. And then, slowly, gently, coming back to that version of you, not to stay there, but to bring them with you. To let the child who asked why 1,000 times without shame sit beside the adult who answers with grace. To let the part of you that once needed to be the smartest learn how to be the most present. Because when you do that, when you integrate your intellect with your humanness, you don't just become sharper, you become powerful in a way that can't be taught. The kind of power that doesn't silence others but inspires them. The kind of power that doesn't seek attention but commands respect. The kind of power that says, I see you, I hear you, and I'm still learning too. That's the person I've become, not perfect, not immune, but awake. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're on that path too. Maybe you've felt the ache of knowing too much, too fast. Maybe you've reached the top of a ladder you were told would make you feel enough and found only more ladders. Maybe, like me, you're learning to slow down, to soften, to trust something deeper than intellect. If so, I hope you know this. You don't have to chase your worth. You don't have to fix what's not broken, and you don't have to sacrifice your soul to sound smart. You are allowed to be brilliant and confused, insightful and afraid, driven and tender. You are allowed to change again and again and again, because the mind is powerful, but the heart makes it human. And when you lead with both, that's when you become unstoppable.